All right, so picking this up in the midweek class. I am also fighting a cold, so forgive me if I cough more than usual. I already cough as it is a lot, but forgive me if I do. But I do want to try to pick up right where we left off last week. I'm not going to get into a review. If you are uh, just clicking on this out of sequence, we're covering the difference between grammatical gender and semantic gender. And we were finishing up this section on Sunday, and I had to move through it quickly. So we're picking up right where I left off on Sunday, talking about gender language in the Bible, and closing out that section, which is where we left off, was in Acts 1, 15, and 16. And I said we would just be moving through this more slowly in the midweek class, so keep you caught up. So, um, like you can see here, there's a lot going on. You see lots of green, lots of yellow, and you'll also notice we've got a couple of grays here. These are just textual variants, the difference between disciples and brothers or believers. Let's see, brothers and sisters. Okay. Um, and even though they are different words, it's the same thing. Okay, it's um, different Greek word, and I'll try to demonstrate why that textual variant exists, but it's not super important to this conversation about gender language. Um, so so what we're looking at is going to be the other word for believers here. That this is adelphoi. Let me do this. The other word for believers here, brothers. This is the word for adelphoi. It's a different word in the Texas Receptus, which is reflected in the KJV and the NKJV. Even though they're synonymous, they are different words, but this is the word we're going to be most concerned with, as well as the word in the middle here, and men and brethren, brothers, so on. So, in order to get into this, it's probably best to establish context, because once we establish context, you'll see that um, while this looks overwhelming, it will help make more sense how this one is more complicated and more important. So let's go ahead and establish the context. Okay, so Acts 1, 12 through 26. Then they returned to Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath day's journey away. When they arrived, they went to the room upstairs where they were staying. Peter, John, James, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas the son of James. They were all continually united in prayer, along with the women, including Mary, the mother of Jesus, and his brothers. In those days, Peter stood up among the brothers and sisters. The number of the people who were gathered together was about 120, and said, "Brothers and sisters, it was necessary that the scripture be fulfilled, that the Holy Spirit, through the mouth of David, foretold about Judas. For it is written in the book of Psalms, 'Let his dwelling place become desolate, let no one live in it, and let someone else take his position.' Therefore, from among the men who have accompanied us during the whole time the Lord Jesus went in and out among us, beginning from the baptism of John until the day he was taken from us, from among these it is necessary that one become a witness with us of his resurrection." So they proposed two: Joseph, called Barsabas, who was also known as Justus, and Matthias. Then they prayed, "You, Lord, you know, sorry, you, Lord, know everyone's hearts. Show which of these two you have chosen to take the place in this apostolic ministry that Judas left to go where he belongs." Then they cast lots for them, and the lot fell to Matthias, and he was added to the 11 apostles. All right, so before I continue with the context here, I just want to demonstrate quickly that textual variant. Here's brothers and sisters. It's the word for adelphoi. but the word in the text is receptus is the word for disciples. And basically what happened is a later scribe in an attempt to prevent confusion for Adelphoi here being confused with Jesus's brothers. So in those days, Peter stood up from among the disciples, or the people who were gathered together, the 120, not just Jesus's biological brothers. Okay, so that's what happened there. A later scribe changed it so that there wouldn't be confusion, but it's the Adelphoi and the disciples are referring to the same 120 people. Okay, all right, now the context. So, all right, so then they returned to Jerusalem, and when they went to the room upstairs, they were where they were staying, and who were the they? Peter, John, James, Andrew, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, James, Simon, Judas, the son of James, etc. They were all continually united in prayer along with the women. That's important, including Mary, the mother of Jesus, and his brothers. In those days, Peter stood up among the brothers and sisters. The number of the people were gathered together 120, and he said, "Brothers and sisters." This is we mentioned this on Sunday. This is the Anir Adelphoi, or men brothers. Okay, then what happens is the question is, who is Peter addressing? Okay, and then you also have, and then they propose two. Okay, so who's the they? Who proposed to? So whoever he is addressing is going to be among those who do the selecting. So this could impact, not this passage exclusively, but this could impact your church ecclesiology, whether you have a Presbyterian-run church, a congregational-run church, or a bishop-run church. All right. I'm not going to get into all of those, but if you understand those differences, you'll understand how this passage could whether either support or something you'd have to wrestle with from one of those church polity positions. So this can impact it, but I'm not going to settle the debate on this passage, right? I'll let you guys work that out on your own with your own church and your own pastors and so on and so forth. But you can see how this passage is going to impact this debate on church polity. Again, it's not going to solve it. Even if you land in one way on this, doesn't mean that settles the debate for church polity. It just, this becomes a supporting passage or not for your position. All right, so we're going to zoom in a little bit. Again, I'm going to zoom in on two translations specifically. And we'll first see the difficulty of what Peter says when he stands among the Adelphon. Okay, so he's standing among this group, brothers and sisters, semantically gendered, neutered, okay, or brothers, semantically gendered, ambiguous. Is this males only, or brothers in the sense where we saw before, a mixed crowd of people related together by common ties or interests? To know, we need to look at the context, which we already did. So just before this, we saw that the women are united with the men in the place. Further, it tells you who the brothers are. It's a crowd of 120 people. So either you have to say the women are not a part of the crowd despite being united with everyone, or the women are a part of the crowd. So it's 120 men specifically, or it's 120 people who are the brothers. I think the LSB translators here, by using persons, by using persons, seem to be suggesting here that they are referring to a mixed crowd. Okay, and with Luke intentionally naming the women specifically, I think Luke is also making it clear who the 120 are. By the way, Luke isn't even here. So he's getting the 120 names either from a roll call, or because they were written down, or he's getting it from an eyewitness. And I tend to think he might be getting it from Mary, because Mary is one of Luke's sources for his gospel, and she's named here specifically. So generally, I'm not going to say it's unanimous on this front, but most commentaries I looked at, even that even deal with this issue, would say that the 120 is a mixed crowd. There were a couple I read that suggested that the 120 was not mixed; it was just men. But most agreed that the that the persons here, the names here, was intended to be understood as a mixed crowd. Okay, so Peter gets in the middle of the crowd, and and then he addresses them. And the address he addresses them with, whoops, let me back up here. The address he addresses them with is Aneris, I think maybe I'm saying it wrong. NRSVue. Don't quote me on my Greek pronunciation. Okay. NRSVue. All right. So men brothers is what that would generally look like if you translated this how you would typically translate it. But that's not to say that this is how it should be understood. That is just one way to understand this, is that it's men brothers. Obviously, you can see the CSB translators go a different direction, and if you watched Sunday's message, you know why they went that way. But grammatically, men brothers like this, okay, there's no conjunction in between them, like some translations have. It's just aner adelphoi. Grammatically, this is what's called an apositive, where you stick two nouns right next to each other to indicate that they're the same thing. They're synonymous. So whatever the men are, the brothers are, and whatever the brothers are, the men are. So if the brothers are generic, then the men are generic. And we know that both of these words can be used in a generic way. But they can also be used in a specific way. So we're trying to figure out, is it generic or is it specific? So whatever they are, that's whatever one is, the other one will be as well. Okay. And and some will say yes, individually that might be the case. So like aner by itself might be generic, and adelphoi by itself might be generic. But together, it has to be directly related to only males. That's usually the position most people take. That most people take if they're going to say that it's men. They're going to say together, it's only addressing men. And this is where using a lexicon can actually become a little bit difficult, because you can look up each word individually, and each of those might mean something different in Greek than what it means together. And this is where going to commentaries is really helpful. Some lexicons will also clue you in on this. And so when I go to commentaries, I'm looking for people who are experts on Greek. All right. And that's where I brought in John Chrysostom. John Chrysostom is an early church father on the Greek side. His mother tongue is Greek. He's not reading from a translation, and he's not translating. John Chrysostom is preaching in Greek to people who know Greek. Okay, so the audience is Greek speaking, and John is Greek speaking as well. So Chrysostom is a go-to for me whenever I want to understand how an early Greek speaker understood the Greek, especially when it's more complicated than going right to a lexicon. So things like idioms are going to be better understood by someone who speaks Greek natively, even better than, he speaks it natively, so he would be using these idioms regularly. Thankfully, John did preach on this passage, and his preaching, he exegetes the passage, and this is what he has to say. But observe how Peter does everything with common consent, nothing imperiously, and he does not speak without a meaning. But observe how he consoles them concerning what had passed. In fact, what had happened had caused them no small consternation. For if there are many who now canvass the circumstance, what may we suppose they had to say then? Men brothers, says Peter's. If even the Lord called them brothers, all the more should Peter when they were all present. What dignity of church! What angelic condition! There was no distinction then, neither male nor female. I wish the churches were like that now. No one had his mind full of worldly matter, and no one was anxiously thinking about household concerns. In this way, even temptations may become a benefit, and afflictions an advantage. Wherefore, at the beginning he said, Men and brethren, it behooves to choose from among you. He defers the decision to the whole body, thereby both making the elected objects of reverence and himself keeping clear of all invidiousness with regard to the rest. All right, so a couple things before I zoom in on his quote. You'll see here this ellipsis. That's just because in the ellipsis, he goes through and he starts talking about what happened to Judas. And so for that, that section, I just blocked it out. Not blocked it out. I just skipped over it because not pertinent to this conversation. He was exegeting what happened to Judas, both prophetically in that psalm that was quoted and historically what happened to him. So let's just zoom in on the sections that are pertinent to this conversation. So you'll notice that Peter does everything with the common consent. All right, common consent. All right, and he specifically says men, brothers. He's repeating the Greek. Remember, Chrysostom is speaking Greek, so he's just reading the Greek. Right? He's not translating it. He's just reading the Greek. So we're reading the Greek as well. And then he uses the word adelphoi here. And so so this is what he's saying. Okay, remember, whatever the brothers are, the men are. Whatever the men are, the brothers are. And so he's getting ready to do that. And he says they were all present, all of them present, which would include that 120 crowd. And then he says, there was no distinction then, neither male nor female. So when John Chrysostom read men, brothers, NRSV, adelphoi, he understood it as neither male nor female. And he further emphasizes it by saying this angelic condition, right? No male or female. All right, and he's quoting Galatians 3:28 here, or I shouldn't say he's quoting it. He's alluding to Galatians 3:28 here, and and then he repeats it. He repeats it, men, brother, and he defers the decision to the whole body, which he has been very clear includes the females. So here is a native Greek speaker speaking to native Greek speakers, right? In the 4th century, reading a Greek Bible. He's not interpreting this as being directed to only men, or that only men should be the ones making the decisions here, or just the elders, right? What he's definitely demonstrating here is that it's also not just the apostles, but adelphoi means the men and women. Women would absolutely, according to Chrysostom, in his view, women would absolutely be participating in this decision. Is this because Chrysostom was a feminist? Absolutely not. He's alluding to Galatians 3:28, as I've already addressed. So what's also interesting here, I was talking to, I believe it was our pastor after the service on Sunday, and he had made the comment, I kind of wish Chrysostom had elaborated further as to how this means male or female. And in our discussion, it became very obvious that he doesn't have to elaborate on it. He already knows what it means, and so does his audience. You would only have to elaborate on it if he was intending it for it to mean something other than what they were expecting it to mean, right? He just says it because and he doesn't have to explain it because they already understand that adelphoi is a common, this came up multiple times in commentaries. This was a common way to address people, common way to address crowds. And so when he gets to adelphoi, he doesn't look at this and say men, brothers. It doesn't actually mean men, brothers. It actually means neither male or female, and here's how I know. That's what you would do with a crowd that didn't understand. But this crowd, he doesn't have to do that with. They all understand. He understands. There's no distinction here between male or female. So You can absolutely disagree with Chrysostom, right? He's not infallible, but you'll have to demonstrate to me why this native Greek speaker does not understand the Greek. And one thing is for certain, you cannot assign feminist motivations to Chrysostom. If you know anything about him, you can't accuse him for that for multiple reasons. It wasn't even a thing in his day to begin with. So, if you do disagree with the translations that render it, including females like Chrysostom does, then you ought not to ascribe feminist motivations to those translations that follow the interpretation of Chrysostom, a native Greek speaker. And every translation here is doing some level of interpreting. They are either interpreting it to include women or they're interpreting it to exclude women. And I'm okay with people disagreeing on this. Clearly, there are smarter people than me who disagree. I do land on the side of Chrysostom because ultimately we're gonna have to trust somebody. And I do trust Chrysostom here because he's a native Greek speaker and he just says it plainly. And I don't think he could have been more clear. And you're going to have to trust someone too. Someone else is going to explain this to you, and they're going to explain to you why this means exclusively men, and you'll have to trust them instead of someone like Chrysostom. So, with that being said, brothers and sisters is a totally legitimate translation option. So this is probably one of the most difficult ones in my mind. But between Luke's special mention of the women, the context of their unity, the crowd being not explicitly men, and the understanding of a native Greek speaker that Aner Adelphoi being in reference to the women and men, despite the fact that they are grammatically male-orientated terms, or I should say grammatically masculine-orientated terms, here they are semantically neutered. That was the word I was looking for. But you can see the translations that lean away from Chrysostom, such as the ESV, the LSB, the NLT. I don't have the NET up here, but the NET also leans that way, and the LEB. But as far as the KJV and the NKJV, it's a little bit more ambiguous. They use brethren. For the NKJV, I would definitely say that they're including the women in this because they don't use the word brothers, but they use the word brethren. It's a little, so this one I think is more clear. This one's harder because the word brothers doesn't exist yet in 1611. So brothers and brethren are, there's no interchangeable. It's all brethren. The plural for brothers is brethren and brethren is brethren. So I could go either way with the KJV. But the NKJV I do think is including the women here by their use of brethren, as far as I can tell. That's my best guess. It's harder to say on those ones because of their use of brethren. It's more ambiguous. But these other ones, the ESV usually puts a footnote when they want ancestors to be understood, and there's no footnote here. LSB, I think it makes it very clear. NLT also puts brothers and sisters regularly, and here they don't. And so that leads me to believe that the NLT translators understood this as being males. And the LEB is a little tougher, but it's the same concept here, where it's harder to tell if the brothers here is the ambiguous term or the gender-specific term. Yeah, so the ones that like the ESV make it easy for me because they don't put the footnote here, and the NLT makes it easy because they didn't add the ancestors like they typically would. So that's that. All right, so these were probably the most difficult passages to deal with. My hope is that you can use these principles to help understand why translators make the decisions they make. So now, I said the NRSV takes it too far sometimes, in my opinion, so I want to show you how the NRSV does it. How does it take it too far? Okay, I'm going to go with the least severe to the most severe. So with the least severe, this is a situation that happens a lot in the Psalms, in which those who interpret the Psalms do so in like a double way. So for here, Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. This man can be interpreted as people in general, in which case there's nothing wrong with going with the NRSV rendering, because it's just people in general. But others interpret this psalm as Christ himself. In that case, the NRSV eliminates that possible interpretation. And what's worse for the NRSV here, right? If they want to remove the maleness of this, and they want to go with something more gender neutral, they did this in such a way as to eliminate Christ from a possible interpretation, but the NIV found a way to not prevent the Christological application. They say, blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord. Here, it's still singular. It's not masculine. It can be generically about anybody, and the one can be Christ. So the NIV was able to walk that line. And I think that if the NRSV was really looking to do that, they should have found a solution like the NIV did here. So this, in my opinion, goes too far. It's not, it is the least severe, but I don't like eliminating ambiguity where it can be retained. I also wouldn't have said anything at all if they had at least footnoted that this was literally singular. And then I wouldn't have said anything. I would have just said, follow the footnote. It tells you. But they didn't. They forced it to be plural when it is singular. They removed the masculine, which I'm fine with, but they did so at the expense of allowing a possible interpretation of this being Christ. So I don't love that. Least severe, but still a problem for me. And by the way, this happens in all translations for the most part. Somewhere along the line, there will be an interpretation that it can be about Christ or about people generically. And some translations handle that dual interpretation better than others. And that's the way it is. And this is one of the benefits of retaining the singularity, which is why the CSB opts not to use the they when they could, and they stick with the singular. All right, so let's go to the next one. Now here, you'll look, I'm just zooming in on two translations here just to make it easier so you don't see as much differences. But here we have a cross-reference. That's also part of the reason I'm doing this, is Jesus in Mark 14:61 through 62. It says, but he kept silent and did not answer. And again, the high priest questioned him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, said Jesus, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, coming with the clouds of heaven. In the NRSV, it says something very similar. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? Jesus said, I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. All right, so you can see those two are pretty much nearly identical. Good with both of them. The problem is when we get to the Old Testament, the cross-reference. I continued watching in the sky. So this is in the night visions, I should say. This is Daniel. I continued watching in the night visions, and suddenly one like the Son of Man was coming in the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was escorted before him. While the NRSV says, as I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a human being coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. All right, so here's an attempt to remove some of the male references in the Bible where they change in the Old Testament Son of Man to human being. The translation itself is legitimate. That's what Son of Man means. It means a human being. The problem is with this is that word, that phrase, Son of Man, becomes a title, which is prevalent throughout the Old Testament. And by changing it in Daniel and not changing it in Mark, you break that connection. They break that connection between the Old and New Testament because they removed all the Son of Man references in the Old Testament, yet they retain them all in the New Testament, which is so inconsistent, in my opinion. They could have found a way to remove the maleness if that was their intent and retain the connection. They could have used human being for both. It would sound awkward in English to refer to Jesus as a human being per se, as opposed to Son of Man, like a title. And that's probably just because I'm familiar with the title Son of Man. But by keeping both, they would have retained the connection. Now it doesn't feel like that connection exists at all, or it feels like it's being forced instead of having a naturally, readily recognizable connection. So this one's pretty severe in my mind because you just really lose that connection, and I don't like it. I don't like that at all. I think it could lead to bad theology potentially. Um, I try to be fair in this, where I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. I try to be charitable, but here I really struggle with this one. Um, I don't like it at all. They should have at least kept the translation consistent from Old Testament to New Testament. All right, next one. Titus 1:6. An elder must be blameless, the husband of one wife, with faithful children who are not accused of wildness or rebellion. Titus 1:6 in the NRSV says, someone who is blameless, married only once, whose children are believers, not accused of debauchery and not rebellious. So here, the CSB maintains the husband of one wife verbiage. The NRSV goes with married only once. Now, there are different interpretations as to whether this is about polygamy or divorce or so on and so forth. I'm not going to get into that. But what is clear is that throughout church history, elders were men, and they were the husband of one wife. Okay? Here they removed the husband and the male verbiage, and so now they can have anyone, male or female, who's been married only once. So this is quite indicative of mainline churches who have a lot of female pastors, if you can call them that. I don't think I can. But they have female people who call themselves pastors. That's probably a better way to say that. And so this translation would support that reading or that understanding. And I think this is a problem. All right. Moving on. I think you can decide for yourself if you think that's a problem, but I do there. All right. All right. So the NRSV UE. So let me go back a slide here. So here's the thing: the NRSV itself. That's what I wanted to get into. The NRSV itself is no longer published. Okay, it's been replaced with the NRSV UE, or the NRSV updated edition. All right. So you might ask, did the NRSV UE, did they change directions, or did they improve? Did they see the error of their way, or did they double down? Well, we can read here. The NRSV UE has replaced the NRSV, so you might ask, what happened? Did they double down? What is, so this is taken from the NRSV website. What is the NRSV updated edition? The NRSV updated edition reflects discoveries of ancient texts and new insights made in the 30 years since the NRSV was last revised. The newly updated translation offers clearer, more direct, and inclusive language, and increased cultural sensitivity absent of the unintended biases of prior versions. Okay? They continue. What is the origin of the NRSV updated edition? The NRSV updated edition is the result of rigorous biblical scholarship and gives readers access to the most inclusive, informed, and reliable text available. As new manuscripts come to light following the 1989 introduction of the NRSV, an improvement was undertaken to ensure the accuracy, clarity, and modernity of the updated translation. So, to answer your question, they only doubled down. Okay? They doubled down further. And I could get into examples where they start also, they change language in the scriptures that condemn homosexuality and generally, and they try to make it to male prostitution or pederism, where it's men with boys instead of just homosexuality in general. Um, so that being said, when picking a primary translation, this is our first and probably will be the only red flag translation we talk about. I'll just tell you, like things like the Passion and the New World Translation are red flags as well. But when I'm looking at the NRSVue and I'm going through my list of criteria, number one to me is probably the most important on my list, honestly. It's definitely up there. And it doesn't meet number one because we've got people on the committee that aren't even Christian. And we've got a number of mainline people on the committee that probably do not affirm the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed. And they definitely aren't evangelical. They're mainline. All right. Yes, a number of churches have adopted it. Yes, source language scholars have engaged with it, even positively. Like I said, such people can translate a Bible accurately. Although I think what I just demonstrated was some places where they don't translate it accurately. But so what I've said before is the NRSV is generally translated well in most places, but I don't trust the translators. And so when the translation does differ from translations I do trust, I see red flags, significant red flags, like ones I just showed you. I think if you're an apologist who's going to push back against things like arsenikotoi, men who bed other men, the words for homosexuality, it's good for apologists to deal directly with the NRSVue. So they need to be aware of how the NRSVue is translating these terms. And I would say, generally, I would say you're probably not in danger of stark heresy, although because of those places where they remove Son of Man in the Old Testament to just human being and they don't retain the connection in New Testament, it is possible that that could be interpreted in more heretical ways, preventing Jesus from having that Old Testament connection. And understanding the text the way the Jews who heard him understood what he was saying. So I do think there are some dangers of heresy there. I do believe you could run into very much heterodoxy by not addressing homosexuality biblically or the requirements for an elder. So have local churches largely adopted this translation for public and corporate worship? I would say yes, but not. A lot of them aren't evangelical churches. They're primarily the mainline churches. So primarily because of number one, and their clear motivation stated in the preface and their frequently asked questions, I can't in good conscience make this a yellow flag translation. So yeah, this is where I land. I think the other situation is we have so many good green flag translations, and we even have good yellow flag translations that I would readily recommend before I would recommend this one. So while this one is probably going to get me some pushback, and I'm okay with that, I do think this is a red flag translation. All right, so that's that. I'm going to end this lesson here. I'm going to pick back up with the end of the NIV story next. You all are dismissed. Thank you.